What if the person you trusted most to save the life of someone you loved was the very reason you lost them? It's a chilling thought. One moment you believe in the system, in the people who wear the white coats, in the supposed heroes who dedicate their lives to saving others. And the next moment, everything falls apart. This story is real. It's not fiction. It's about a husband, a young mother, 2 children, and a doctor whose arrogance would not only destroy a life, but also leave a permanent mark on a family. The story begins with love, youth, and ordinary struggles. It escalates into a single devastating event that no one could have predicted. And then comes a fight for justice that spans years, a courtroom battle that forces one man to relive every nightmare, and the ultimate collapse of the doctor who thought he was untouchable. But beyond the tragedy, this is a story about resilience, courage, and the consequences of unchecked arrogance. It's a warning, a cautionary tale, and a reminder that sometimes the people we trust the most can fail us in ways we never imagined. And what happened that day would set off a chain of events that echoed through decades, shaping lives forever. The story didn't begin with tragedy. It began with love. He had just graduated from high school, full of dreams and plans for the future. She, Betty, was still in school, young, vibrant, and carrying their first child. At just 18 or 19, she was already stepping into a world full of responsibility, and yet her spirit never dimmed. Life was far from easy. They had 2 children in quick succession and lived in a modest trailer park. Money was tight, bills piled up, and every day felt like a struggle just to keep the family afloat. Yet, amidst the challenges, they found moments of joy, laughing over small mishaps, holding each other through the nights when fear or sickness struck, and celebrating the tiny victories that made life worth living. Betty was unforgettable. She wasn't like anyone else. Her hair constantly changed colors from deep black to shocking pink, until it became brittle from overdying, at which point she boldly shaved it and started over. She belly danced in the living room just for fun, dressed in her own unique style, and carried an energy that warned the world, "Don't mess with me." But at home, with her husband and children, she was warm, playful, and fiercely loving. There was one thing that shadowed their daily life. Betty had epilepsy. He had seen her seize before, twice before the day that would change everything, once while eating breakfast, once while hiking under flickering sunlight through the trees, triggered by a sudden flash. Each time his heart had raced, panic clawing at his chest, but they managed. He learned to recognize the subtle signs, to act quickly, to stay calm. Yet, they had no idea that her condition would one day collide with arrogance in a way neither he nor she could have imagined. A collision that would turn ordinary love and routine into horror, grief, and a fight for justice that would last for decades. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind where sunlight filtered softly through the windows, and the children were playing quietly, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Betty was getting ready to drop the kids at her mother's house before heading to the mall. Everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. He noticed the subtle flicker in her eyes, a tension in her body he had learned to recognize over the years. And then, in the blink of an eye, she collapsed. Her body convulsed violently, twisting in ways that made his stomach churn with panic. The sound of her gasps and the terrified screams of their 3-year-old were deafening. His heart raced, thudding in his chest like a drum he couldn't control. He acted on instinct. He rolled her onto her side and cleared her mouth, repeating the steps her parents had drilled into him countless times. "Stay calm. You can do this," he told himself, though fear clawed at his mind with every second that passed. The baby, Sam, slept just inches away, unaware of the chaos, and he had to carefully shield him while comforting their screaming toddler. "It's okay, buddy. Mommy's okay. She'll be fine," he murmured, though inside he felt powerless. Hands trembling, he dialed 911. "Help! My wife! She's having a grand mal seizure! Please hurry!" His voice cracked with desperation, each word carrying the weight of fear and helplessness. Outside, the wail of sirens grew closer, a promise of help that somehow felt painfully slow. By the time the paramedics arrived, adrenaline coursed through him, every nerve on fire. They took control quickly, securing Betty and rushing her to the ambulance. He followed behind, one hand gripping her arm, whispering prayers he didn't even know he believed in. Every bump on the road, every flash of lights, every second of travel felt like a lifetime. Even inside the hospital, he couldn't relax. Every nurse who walked past, every beeping monitor, every word from the ER staff filled him with anxiety. He kept asking himself, are they doing enough? Are they taking this seriously? Please, don't let this be the day I lose her. Little did he know, the nightmare had only just begun. The hospital, the place meant to save her, would soon become the stage for a tragedy he could never have imagined. And it would test every ounce of his courage, every bit of his patience, and his very ability to fight for justice. When he finally reached the emergency room, his heart was still hammering. He had hoped that once Betty was in the hands of professionals, she would be safe. But the moment he met the ER doctor, let's call him Dr. Thoreau, something felt off. Dr. Thoreau looked her over once, his eyes scanning her like she was just another patient in a long line, not a person whose life depended on his decisions. He's going to put her under for a CAT scan and an MRI, just to rule out anything unrelated to epilepsy, he said, almost dismissively. He tried to explain. She's had seizures before. These are real seizures. The doctor barely nodded, his tone skeptical, almost bored. Then came the questions about drugs and alcohol. Any recreational drugs? Alcohol? No, he said. Maybe a drink 2 nights ago, but nothing else. She's not on anything that would cause this. The doctor barely considered it. He glanced at her, judged her appearance, and decided he knew better. This looks like substance use, he stated flatly, dismissing everything he had said. Hours turned into a day and a half. During that time, Betty remained sedated, not receiving the medications that could have controlled her seizures. No EEGs, no seizure-specific treatment, just endless waiting and observation for tests that weren't relevant. Every hour he spent in the waiting room felt like torture. He watched nurses and staff pass, sometimes giving glances that seemed routine, sometimes with subtle signs of sympathy, but no one intervened to ensure proper seizure care. He paced, whispered prayers, and tried to keep the kids calm, feeling every second stretch into eternity. Finally, they performed an EEG, the test he had begged for since the moment they arrived. The results confirmed his fears. Betty had been seizing the entire time. Her brain had been under continuous assault, undetected, untreated. And in that moment, the arrogance of one man became the most devastating reality of their lives. The hours in the hospital waiting room stretched like years. Every beep from a monitor, every footstep in the corridor made his chest tighten. He could see the fear etched on the faces of the nurses and staff, but no one intervened in the way he desperately hoped. Finally, the EEG was done. The results were terrifyingly clear. Betty had been seizing the entire time, non-stop. The sedation, the routine tests, the dismissal, they hadn't saved her. They had allowed her brain to be irreparably damaged. The doctor spoke in clinical terms he barely understood. Words like brain dead, DNR, and hospice care floated in the air, each one stabbing at his chest. He felt his world collapse. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't fair. He held her hand, cold and limp in his grasp, and whispered promises he would never be able to keep. "I'm here, Betty. I'll never leave you. Please, fight." But the fight was over. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, final goodbyes, and helpless tears.
He signed DNRs, made decisions that no one should ever have to make for someone they love, and watched as the hospital prepared for the worst. Days later, she passed. The woman who had brought light, laughter, and strength to his life was gone. And just as the world seemed to have stopped turning, life delivered another cruel blow. It was September 11th, a date that would be etched into history forever. For him, it became personal, a marker of loss and devastation. His wife would have celebrated her 23rd birthday just 5 days earlier, and he had turned 25 amidst tragedy he could never have imagined. Grief consumed him. He couldn't eat, sleep, or think clearly. Raising 2 young boys alone, facing the empty silence of a trailer park that had once been filled with laughter, it was unbearable. Every object in the house, every room, every photograph reminded him of what had been taken too soon. For a long time, he didn't want revenge or money. He didn't want lawyers or lawsuits. He just wanted Betty back. But slowly, with encouragement from friends and family, he realized that inaction would only let the arrogance that killed her go unpunished. He had to fight, not just for closure, but for justice. After the tragedy, he was broken. But broken as he was, he knew that doing nothing would let the doctor's arrogance go unpunished. Slowly, with the encouragement of close friends and family, he contacted a lawyer, a careful, determined professional who promised to take the case seriously. The legal process was grueling. Every document, every deposition, every meeting with attorneys felt like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. He had to relive every detail, recounting the events surrounding Betty's death in excruciating detail. Each retelling brought the pain back, but also fueled his resolve. The hospitals and staff involved in Betty's care quickly settled out of court. They didn't want the scrutiny, the media attention, or the exposure of mistakes. Except for Dr. Thoreau. He refused to settle, insisting on a trial. The arrogance hadn't left him. He wanted to defend his name, to prove he was in the right, no matter the human cost. Court days were unbearable. Sitting in the gallery, he watched Dr. Thoreau carry himself with the same cold, dismissive arrogance he had shown in the ER. The lawyer guided him, helping him prepare for testimony, making sure every fact, every timeline, and every oversight was clearly documented. When it was time to testify, he spoke with a trembling voice but unwavering conviction. He recounted the day of the seizure, the ambulance ride, the hospital's dismissive attitude, and every moment he begged for proper care. Each word felt like reliving the nightmare, but it was necessary. Each word chipped away at the facade of the man who had caused so much pain. The jury listened. They examined the evidence, Betty's medical history, the toxicology report, the EEG results, and witness testimonies. They heard the truth. The doctor had fallen far below the standard of care. And then came the verdict. 7-2, in his favor. A wave of relief, grief, and vindication washed over him. The court acknowledged the injustice, assigning millions in damages. The civil case was over, but the story didn't end there. Dr. Thoreau's professional life was destroyed, his license suspended, unemployable in medicine, and eventually broke. The arrogance that cost a young mother her life also cost him everything he had. Even years later, the sting of grief remained. Justice had been served, but it was a hollow victory. Money could not replace Betty, nor erase the memories of that fateful day.
Even after the courtroom had delivered its verdict, life didn't suddenly feel right. He had won legally, but the emotional wounds were far from healed. 20 years later, he still carries the echoes of that day, and so does the world around him, though sometimes in ways he could never have predicted. He began sharing his story online, hoping to shed light on medical negligence, to warn others, and to honor Betty's memory. But the response was staggering, though not in the way he expected. Instead of empathy or understanding, he was met with ridicule, gaslighting, and downvotes. Social media was filled with memes mocking patient spouses in ER scenarios, as if grief and tragedy were jokes. A handful of people understood. They expressed support, shared similar experiences, and sent messages of solidarity. But the majority laughed, questioned his motives, and dismissed the reality of what had happened. Even now, he sometimes scrolls through these reactions, feeling a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. Meanwhile, Dr. Thoreau faded from public attention, but the arrogance lingered. He never admitted wrongdoing publicly. He never apologized. To this day, his reputation outside the medical community is a shadow of what it once was. But the lingering arrogance in certain circles shows how some people refuse to acknowledge the truth, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Through it all, he clings to one undeniable fact. The story, the cautionary tale, and the memory of Betty remain. Every laugh, every meme, every attempt to dismiss his experience only reinforces the importance of telling the truth. His story is more than personal grief. It's a warning, a lesson, and a testament to resilience. He reflects on the absurdity of the public reaction, but also on his own journey, the loss, the fight, and the endurance required to keep speaking out. The world may not always understand, but the truth is alive in his memory, in the lessons he shares, and in the cautionary tale that will not be forgotten. Years passed, but time did little to dull the sharp edges of grief. Raising two boys without Betty was a daily reminder of everything lost. Every birthday, every school event, every quiet evening at home carried her absence like a shadow that never lifted. He reflects often on those early days, the laughter, the struggles, the vibrancy of their love. Even the small quirks that once seemed trivial now feel monumental. Her bright pink hair, her belly dancing in the living room, the way she could make even a rainy afternoon feel like an adventure. These memories are bittersweet, sweet in their vividness, bitter in their permanence. Life after tragedy was a lesson in endurance. He learned to navigate grief while building a future for his sons. Simple moments like making breakfast, helping with homework, or watching them play became acts of survival and resilience. Each small victory, each laugh, each milestone was a tribute to Betty's memory. Yet he also carried anger and frustration. The arrogance of a single doctor, the dismissive attitude of some medical professionals, and the mocking responses of strangers online, all these remained vivid reminders of injustice. But he channeled those feelings into advocacy. Sharing his story became a mission to educate, to caution, and to honor Betty's life. He realized that while nothing could undo the past, every choice he made afterward mattered. Every decision to speak, to protect his family, and to fight for justice was a way to reclaim power from a tragedy that once seemed uncontrollable. And in those moments, he found strength. Not the strength to undo what happened, but the strength to ensure that her memory endured. Life after loss is never easy. It's messy, painful, and often unfair, but it is also full of resilience, lessons, and unexpected courage. And through it all, the love he had for Betty and the family they built together remained unshakable, proof that even tragedy cannot erase the bonds of love. Looking back, the story is heartbreaking, infuriating, and yet strangely illuminating. It's a tale of love, loss, and the consequences of arrogance. One man's dismissal, one doctor's overconfidence cost a life and left a family to navigate grief that no words can fully capture. But it's also a story of resilience. It's about a husband who refused to let injustice stand, who fought through unbearable pain to demand accountability. It's about the lessons learned in the hardest moments, that vigilance, knowledge, and courage matter, especially when someone else's care, or lack thereof, determines life or death. He wants viewers to take away more than just the shock or tragedy of the events. He wants them to recognize the fragility of life, the importance of advocating for those you love, and the dangers of blind trust in authority. Mistakes happen, but arrogance in positions of power can have catastrophic consequences. Even years later, he reflects on the story with a mix of sorrow and purpose. The pain remains, but so does the knowledge that telling the truth, sharing experiences, and warning others can make a difference. Betty's life was cut short, but her story, her memory, her laughter, her spirit continues to teach and to warn. In the end, this is not just a story of loss. It's a story of endurance, accountability, and the human capacity to fight for justice against overwhelming odds. It is a cautionary tale that reminds us all, never underestimate the weight of responsibility, and never stop fighting for the ones you love, even when the world seems indifferent.